Ellie Torres adjusted the name tag pinned to her modest blouse as she stepped through the glass doors of the private medical clinic. The marble floor gleamed under soft chandelier light, and the smooth hum of hushed conversations and tapping keyboards filled the air. Polished brass desks and leather chairs surrounded her, where sharply dressed patients and doctors floated through the space like they belonged to another world. Ellie's hands trembled slightly as she moved to her post behind the reception desk. Humble and quiet, she offered a soft smile and nod to those who glanced her way, doing her best to disappear into the background. The clinic was unusually busy that afternoon. Ellie answered calls, scheduled appointments, and greeted patients with her best practiced politeness. Among the well-coiffed visitors, a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit sat impatiently, scrolling through his phone with a sharp gaze darting around. Ellie's stomach tightened as she noticed the tension building in the room. Suddenly, a man in the waiting area clutched his chest and dropped to the floor. A sharp gasp rippled through the room. Glassware rattled from a nearby table, phones were pulled from pockets in a scramble. The man's face twisted in pain, but the clinic's polished calm shattered. Ellie immediately reached for the emergency button on the desk, but before she could raise her voice, the well-dressed man pointed a finger at her with cold accusation. She saw him fall and did nothing, just stared down at her phone. Ignoring someone's life like that? Several staff members and patients murmured agreement or short derisive remarks. The clinic manager appeared swiftly, eyes stern as he declared Ellie negligent and fired her on the spot. They escorted her out among whispers and judgment. Ellie's heart hammered painfully as she stepped outside, head bowed, knowing she was innocent but utterly powerless in that gilded room. Ellie closed the door to her small apartment behind her, the click clicking louder in the quiet room than it ever should have. She dropped her bag onto the worn couch and sat down, feeling the weight of the day pressed down against her chest. The sterile, upscale environment of the clinic, it felt so foreign now, like a dream she could barely remember. The accusations and cold dismissal played on a loop in her mind. She barely had the strength to move, let alone eat dinner or return the handful of texts waiting on her phone. The sinking feeling wasn't just heartbreak, it was a gnawing fear that her chance was gone. Her apartment was modest and neat, but nothing like the gleaming clinic lobby she had been fired from so publicly. It was a studio space facing the brick wall of the neighboring building, with just enough room for a small kitchen and a bed she shared with an overgrown golden retriever named Max. He nudged his head against her knee, sensing her despair, but Ellie barely managed a soft stroke across his fur. She didn't speak much these days, voices felt heavy and consuming. As she stared blankly out the window at the rainy city street, memories flooded her, snapshots of another time when everything felt fragile but hopeful. She remembered herself as a fiercely determined student, the daughter who had once balanced top grades with the constant upkeep of her mother's care. Her mother, weakened by illness but still sharp-eyed, had insisted Ellie finish school. Ellie had fought to be the best in her administrative courses, dreaming of a steady career that would lift her family out of the constant scramble. But then the diagnosis came: they didn't have the money for the treatments, and Ellie had to quit college to care for her mother full-time. Overnight, the world had shrunk to hospital visits, medicine schedules, and late-night worries whispered in dark rooms. Jobs had to come and go, all inconsistent and low-paying, never enough to save but enough to keep them afloat. Ellie had sacrificed so much, holding her dreams in reserve. Every exhaustion-filled night, she made silent promises to herself that someday, somehow, she'd find a door, an opportunity. The receptionist role at the clinic was that door. She'd gotten the job after interviews, tests, and months of trying to prove she belonged somewhere better. Finally, a position where her care and efficiency mattered, where a steady paycheck was within reach. She worked late to learn the software, memorized every protocol, and practiced polite, professional smiles until they felt natural. This wasn't just a job, it was the small beacon of stability she needed. And then it had all come crashing down in one moment of accusation and dismissal. Her phone buzzed, a message from Gail, a coworker from an old part-time job, checking in on her. Ellie wanted to answer, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain that she had called for help instantly? That the chaos around her misunderstood her every move? She swallowed hard and stared at the screen until it went dark again. Sleep refused to come. She lay tangled in the sheets, staring at the ceiling fan slowly turning overhead. The noise was a dull distraction from the rush of thoughts, a blend of shame, frustration, and loneliness. What if no one believed her? What if this one moment labeled her forever? The clinic's polished floors, the whispers of judgment, the cold eyes, they haunted her more than any physical pain. Ellie's mind wandered further back, remembering nights when she'd stayed up balancing bills and medication schedules, wiping sweat from her mother's fevered brow. The pride her mother showed when Ellie got the exams she needed to apply to college. The early mornings jogging with Max to shake off worry. The quiet resilience she'd gathered around herself like armor, brick by brick. But here she was now, a woman with dropped hopes, pinned under a weight she hadn't asked for. The next morning, Ellie's hand trembled as she brewed the simplest breakfast, just toast and coffee, but the toast burned slightly, forgotten by distracted fingers. She wanted to call her former manager or the clinic, but the sting of their rejection lingered. Her name now carried a shadow she hadn't deserved. Her days became routines of unanswered emails and calls that never reached the right ears. Applications for low-paying jobs she'd once dismissed piled up beside the door, each rejection cutting deeper. Sitting at the window with Max beside her, Ellie sometimes wondered if she had worked hard enough, if this was all just a cruel mockery. But there was no surrender in her gaze, even when the tears came, that quiet steadfastness that had carried her through missed dreams and relentless challenges. One afternoon, while scrolling through messages from her support group, Ellie recalled an earlier moment from the clinic. She'd heard a nurse's voice clearly instructing others over the radio during the emergency, contradicting the narrative that no help had been called promptly. That memory felt like a crack in the wall that trapped her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her hold on to something more than defeat. Despite the dull ache of humiliation and fear, Ellie's resolve had not broken. She would seek the truth, not because she wanted to prove others wrong, but because she owed it to herself to be heard. The road ahead was uncertain and unkind, but Ellie's story was far from over. Ellie sat at her kitchen table, the soft glow of her laptop illuminating her face in the dim light. She had spent the last few days replaying the moment when the man had collapsed, scrutinizing every detail. Then, without warning, the memory surfaced, a sharp nurse's voice clear and unwavering over the radio, calling for emergency assistance, her tone brisk but professional. This detail didn't match the clinic's story that no immediate response had been summoned. Ellie's fingers trembled as she typed a polite email to the clinic's administrative office, requesting a chance to clarify the situation. She hoped for a chance to explain, but the silence from the other end was deafening. A few hours later, her phone rang. The caller ID revealed the clinic's manager, Joanna Grant. Ellie's heart pounded, both hopeful and anxious. She picked up, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Ellie, we received your message," Joanna said flatly. "But the decision stands. Your actions, or lack of them, put the clinic at risk. We appreciate your time, but there's nothing we can do to reconsider." Ellie swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I just want to share information. There's evidence that emergency services were called right away, and that I alerted the medical team immediately." Joanna's voice tightened. "This isn't up for debate. We must protect the clinic's reputation, and your termination is final." The line went dead. Ellie sat back in her chair, the tightness in her chest spreading. But she refused to let it be the end. The following day, Ellie returned to the clinic, not as a receptionist but as a patient. She wore a plain coat pulled tightly around herself, hair pulled back to avoid attention. Her heart hammered as she glided through the entrance, the polished lobby feeling colder and more intimidating than before. She approached the security desk, keeping her expression neutral. "Hi, I'd like to speak with someone about a situation involving a past staff member," she said carefully. The security officer nodded, eyeing her for a moment before motioning toward a small office off to the side. Inside sat a man in a uniform, Carlos, the lead security guard she had met once when she arrived at the clinic. He looked up and recognized her immediately, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face. "Ellie, what are you doing back here?" he asked quietly. "I need your help," she said, lowering her voice. "There was an emergency in the waiting room, and I was accused of ignoring it. But I know that's not true. I heard the nurse's voice on the radio. Would it be possible to review security footage from that day? Just to see if my version matches what happened?" Carlos hesitated, then leaned forward. "I can access the footage for security reasons, but I don't usually share it. This isn't standard." "I understand," Ellie said softly. "I just need to clear my name. I would be careful with it, only for my own peace of mind." After a long moment, Carlos nodded slowly. "All right. I'll see what I can find." The next day, Ellie returned to Carlos's office, where he greeted her with a folder containing snippets of video timestamps. Together, they watched the footage, grainy but clear enough to tell the story. The video showed Ellie immediately reaching for the emergency button, her fingers pressing it quickly. The staff responds swiftly, nurses rush into the room, a nurse's voice issuing precise instructions over the radio, just as Ellie had recalled. The patient receives prompt care. Ellie's breath caught as she saw the truth unfold on the screen. Her actions were not only timely, they were decisive. The image shattered the false narrative of indifference. Carlos handed her a copy of the timestamped footage and nodded toward another folder. "I also pulled the doctor's notes from that day," he said. Ellie opened the folder. The notes were meticulous, the patient's condition recorded, emergency protocols initiated, and exact times noted for each response stage. It explicitly confirmed that emergency action was immediate. Her name was mentioned as responsible for alerting the team. Ellie's chest tightened, but this time with a spark of hope. She now held undeniable proof that contradicted everything the clinic had told others, and that had destroyed her livelihood. But despite the clarity of evidence, Ellie felt the challenge rising before her: how to wield this proof when the people who had accused her were the gatekeepers. The clinic's reputation and their desire to suppress the truth would not easily yield. Still, the embers of injustice stoked a quiet fire within her. Ellie knew she could not stay silent any longer. She would confront the accusations head-on, seeking the justice that was hers, firm, fearless, and honest. This was her moment, the reclaiming of a voice that had been drowned out by whispers and assumptions. She would find a way to make them listen. Ellie returned to the clinic on a brisk autumn morning, the city's chill prickling through her coat but failing to touch the growing certainty inside her. Today was the day she had decided to reclaim her name. The clinic was hosting a well-attended medical seminar, a prestigious event that drew some of the city's most influential doctors, patients, and donors. It was the kind of occasion where reputations were forged or broken in moments, where whispers quickly turned into verdicts. Ellie knew this was her opportunity, not only to clear her name but to confront the very people who had condemned her without hearing the truth. She arrived early, slipping inside with a calm she forced herself to embody. The polished floors reflected chandeliers' glow, and the soft murmur of conversations filled the air, punctuated by the occasional laughter or clinking of glasses. Ellie moved quietly but purposefully toward the atrium where attendees mingled. Her presence drew a few curious glances, some polite, others thinly veiled skepticism. Among the crowd, Ellie spotted Joanna Grant, the clinic manager, chatting with the man who had accused Ellie weeks before, the sharply dressed visitor named Philip Sanderson. Philip noticed her too and narrowed his eyes briefly before turning away, his words hushed as if plotting escape from the inevitability Ellie represented. It was time. Approaching a small podium set near the reception, Ellie cleared her throat to draw attention. The room stilled, exchanges paused as many turned to look at the woman whose name had been whispered in rumor. "I'm Ellie Torres," she began, voice clear but steady. "Several weeks ago, I was accused here of ignoring a medical emergency. I was fired without a chance to explain." A murmur rippled through the attendees, some shifting uncomfortably. Ellie held up a tablet, bringing the screen into view. "But what I have now are records, undeniable proof, that I acted immediately and responsibly." She tapped the screen, and the room filled with the grainy black and white security footage from the day of the incident. There was Ellie, pressing the emergency button, her expression tense but alert. Nurses rushed in quickly, and a nurse's voice was heard issuing directions over the radio. Then Ellie swiped to reveal the scanned doctor's notes, timestamps neatly aligned with the sequence of events. The notes explicitly named Ellie as the person who alerted the staff and called for help. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Whispers turned to stunned silence, and then tentative applause from a few sympathetic attendees. Ellie's gaze swept over the crowd, locking briefly with Philip's. Panic flickered across his face, his confident composure crumbling. I don't know how this happened," Philip stammered, stepping back as his earlier accusations seemed to unravel. "I was certain." Joanna stepped forward, face tight with an awkward mixture of embarrassment and concern. "This challenges our understanding of what happened. We will need to review our procedures." She glanced at Ellie with an effort at reconciliation, the harsh edge of dismissal softened. Ellie took a breath. "This isn't just about procedures. It's about fairness. I was accused without evidence, and my reputation was damaged. I hope to set the record straight today." Voices around her murmured in agreement. One of the clinic's senior doctors, Dr. Adrian Barkley, stepped up. "Ellie's dedication during that emergency reflects the professionalism we expect. It's clear we owe her an apology." Philip's attempts to minimize the situation were met with firm rebukes from staff and patients alike. A few who had once cast doubt on Ellie approached quietly, offering personal apologies. Ellie felt something swell inside her, a powerful mix of relief and quiet vindication. The crowd's mood had flipped entirely. Where once she had stood humiliated and isolated, now she was surrounded by acknowledgement and respect. Joanna signaled to the seminar organizer, who invited Ellie to speak briefly about workplace fairness and the importance of due process. She shared her experience, concise and honest, without bitterness, a testament to her resilience. Near the seminar's close, Ellie was approached by a woman dressed in professional attire with kindly eyes, Dr. Melissa Ramirez, a visiting physician from another city. "I was so impressed by your courage," she said. "I'd like to discuss opportunities for you at my clinic. Your professionalism and integrity are precisely what we value." Ellie's heart quickened. This was more than an apology, it was an open door to a future she still dreamed of. As the event wound down, Ellie stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The city buzzed around her, ordinary yet new somehow, untouched by the shadows that had followed her. Staff and patients she recognized from the seminar greeted her with smiles and nods as she passed. She walked tall, each step shedding the years of doubt and pain. For the first time since the incident, Ellie felt visible in a way that was real, not defined by rumor but by truth. The quiet, humble woman who had been dismissed so easily was no longer invisible. She lifted her chin against the rising sun's warmth, her heartbeat steady and sure. Ellie Torres had reclaimed her dignity, and with it, the promise that her story was still unfolding on her own terms. The days following the seminar buzzed with the kind of attention Ellie had never imagined. Emails, calls, and messages flowed in from colleagues, patients, and even strangers who had heard about her vindication. The clinic where she had been fired found itself under scrutiny not just from within its own ranks but from the wider medical community as word spread of the mishandling of the incident. Joanna Grant, the clinic manager, seemed to vacillate between denial and damage control. One morning, after an especially pointed article appeared in the city's health newsletter that quoted the doctor's own notes and the security footage validation, Joanna reached out. Ellie received her message with cautious eyes. "Ellie, I would like to formally apologize for the way this situation was handled," Joanna wrote. "It was a mistake to dismiss you without a fair inquiry. The clinic values integrity and professionalism, and I recognize your dedication during the emergency. If you would consider returning, we would be honored to have you back, with appropriate recognition." Ellie read the message twice. The words rang hollow at first, as if her years of hardship and pain could be brushed away with a line of text, but the gesture couldn't be ignored. She thought of the security guard Carlos, the doctors who had supported her, and the patients who had smiled in acknowledgement after the seminar. Her path was no longer defined by humiliation, but by the respect she had earned. Instead of responding immediately, Ellie weighed her options carefully. Then, as if destiny wanted to nudge her forward, a call came from Dr. Melissa Ramirez, the visiting physician who had approached her after the seminar. "We'd like to offer you a position at our clinic," Melissa said warmly. "Your strength and professionalism impressed us all. We believe you would thrive here." The offer came with benefits, support for further training, and a team that welcomed a spirit like hers. It felt like the fresh start Ellie needed, a place where her past did not shadow her, but instead, her character illuminated what she could become. In the end, Ellie declined the clinic manager's offer to return. She drafted a courteous letter accepting Dr. Ramirez's invitation, explaining her decision, that she sought an environment where respect was not something she had to fight for, but a foundation she could build upon. The news of Ellie's new position stirred a mixture of reactions. Inside the former clinic, Joanna attempted to contain the fallout. The man who had accused Ellie, Philip Sanderson, faced consequences as well. The clinic barred him from future visits, the board issuing a formal public statement condemning his disparaging behavior and reaffirming their commitment to patients' and staff dignity. Philip's social standing took a significant hit. Invitations to events evaporated, and his reputation among the elites suffered from the very crowd that had once nodded to his word alone. His attempts at damage control faltered, overshadowed by the clinic's firm stance and Ellie's graceful redemption. Meanwhile, Ellie settled into her new role with quiet satisfaction. The warm greetings from Melissa and the staff contrasted starkly with the cold whispers she'd once endured. No longer an outsider, no longer invisible. At a community health event months later, Ellie was invited to speak. She shared her story with a crowd who listened intently, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a journey of perseverance and fairness. Her voice was steady, her demeanor composed, reflecting not just what she had endured but what she had overcome. One afternoon, as the clinic's afternoon sun streamed through the reception window, Ellie filed patient paperwork with steady hands. Her phone buzzed with a message from Joanna. This time, the words were simple and sincere. "Thank you, Ellie. Your strength continues to inspire us all." Ellie smiled softly and replied with a wish for continued goodwill. When her shift ended, Ellie stepped out onto the street. The city hummed around her, vibrant and welcoming. She paused on the corner, breathing in the crisp air, the weight she once carried now a distant memory. Her head lifted high, Ellie walked forward, not just cleared but respected, a woman who had transformed silence into voice, invisibility into presence. The receptionist who had once been dismissed was now recognized for the steady professionalism and heart that she had always possessed.